I just didn't have what it took to say that yeah I was laid off, because automatically your next HR would be like, oh, is she bad at her job? ये तो तुम्हारे back of my mind रहता ही है यार कि शायद मैं मेरे में कुछ होगा.
When there is a desperation in some of these startups to raise the next round of funding, that's when we start seeing a number of job cuts.
How do you suddenly wake up on a day and find out that these 1,000 people are not required, which means your entire decision making on the business has gone wrong.
The reality is, while we might upskill humans on one side very, very quickly, the other side is technology is becoming cheaper by the day, and the cost of technology and its impact is increasing.
Unlike the UK and the US or the West, right? The kind of employees that we are talking about in India are not protected in the manner that they are protected in the West, right?
Let us talk about employees in Indian startups and the job ecosystem in that space. Mass firings and layoffs without any prior notice, poor mental health, overworked, and moonlighting. Rebellion against the typical capitalist mindset focused only on profits and returns. Ladies and gentlemen, I just described to you various moods of an Indian startup employee today. Today's deep dive, ladies and gentlemen, talks about mass firings in the Indian startup ecosystem, the impact it's having on employee morale, and the reasons for such a situation which has been persisting over the last 2.5 to 4 years. You will be surprised that nobody can be completely blamed for this trend, and yet everyone is a part of it. Hello, my name is Abhinav Trivedi, and you are watching Mint Deep Dive. We talk about this in two parts. First, why are the firings happening? As per Mint report recently, more than 15,000 employees were laid off by roughly 100 Indian startups in 2023 as funding winter persisted. Almost 40,000 employees lost their jobs during the height of the funding winter crisis. The year 2024 brought some respite, with nearly 10,000 startup employees losing their jobs. Take these numbers. In May this year, Paytm had said that it had begun the process of downsizing 5,000 to 7,000 jobs. The company, of course, was looking to save 4 to 500 crores in salary cost. In December last year, the company had also laid off 1,000 jobs. Freshworks recently laid off 13% of its global workforce, taking the number to 660. Byju's, we all know about Byju's. Since December 2023, it has already fired 7,000 people. Ola Electric laid off 500 employees in November, with the parent A&I Tech laying off 200 employees. Before the IPO, Swiggy slashed 400 jobs to show better numbers while listing. Dunzo fired 150. Healthify laid off 150. EdTech platform Scaler fired 150. Audio streaming platforms Kuku FM laid off close to 300 contract-based employees, and Pocket FM laid off almost 500 contract-based employees. The biggest layoffs came from EdTech, tech, fintech ecosystem. Majority of these jobs were either replaced by AI automation or people with better skills or low pay. And we're not even including companies which were shut down like Koo, or companies like Go Mechanic, which fired 70% of its employees and the founders admitted to financial reporting errors. Mass firings have been happening in the startup ecosystem down right and center, ladies and gentlemen. These numbers across startups are just reported and do not include the vendor ecosystem. If we include the vendor ecosystem, the number will multiply by 4. But this trend is not just confined to India. Globally, big tech companies Meta, Amazon, Disney, Netflix, Microsoft have laid off thousands and thousands of employees post-COVID till now. In India, some of the firings were subtle, while some were not so subtle. Some were given notice periods, some were asked to leave instantly, right now, like from today at this moment. Sample this termination letter by Pocket FM. The day when this employee was asked to leave, not resign, over the mail was the last day itself, which means in the morning you receive this email that everything is over from this very moment. Your contract has been terminated right now. Imagine you working all night, and when you wake up, you get this email. Of course, the companies, when they send such termination letters, shield themselves with contract letters underlying that they can fire contractual employees with immediate effect. A number of laid off employees from various companies spoke to us off the record for this story. They wanted to keep their identity confidential. The irony is that post firings, companies also post better numbers, where losses have narrowed down and revenue has surged. An important yardstick to raise the next round of funding. We reached out to Pocket FM and Cuckoo FM, but they did not reply. Jobless revenue growth, as many in the ecosystem call it. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. Every company has the right to fire people who are underperforming and not adhering to company standards. But when companies fire in large batches, 60, 100, 5,000, there is a strategic miscalculation on behalf of the founders or over pressurizing of VCs who want returns on their investment as soon as possible.
One of the major issues when you come in with debt related VC funding, but even in equity investments, is that VCs ask for immediate returns. We want to see a 200% return. We want to see a 250% return, off the capital. Like they don't speak in percentages even. They speak in number of times. And there's also expectation that the Indian market will give much higher returns than average. So, one of the ways of showing the returns, if your sales and your top line is not growing, is by reducing your cost. And the biggest cost is always going to be the labor cost, it's always going to be the number of people who are working. So, when there is a desperation in some of these startups to, raise the next round of funding, that's when we start seeing, a number of job cuts. And then again, it's almost cyclical. We also see that they are hiring. It's not like they are not hiring, but they will maybe cut off the middle management. And it's the people in their late 30s, 40s who are being let go. And, younger people are being brought in who are obviously lower cost, also lower skills, and then working directly with the founders. And it, creates a corporate culture which is not very sustainable.
When we are talking of an organization chucking off 500, 700, few thousand people, it's not only the mistake of decision making, it is also lack of understanding of the business in itself. How do you suddenly wake up on a day and find out that these 1,000 people are not required? Which means your entire decision making on the business or understanding of the business, the market, the demand versus supply has gone wrong. Typically, startups 2 years, 3 years, 4 years into the journey do not understand the market and the problems very clearly. So, in the initial phase, you end up recruiting too many people or too less, and the whole game changes. So, this surprise is going to be in. Now, when you talk about jobless growth, as they are posting higher revenues at the same time that they are removing workforce, this is going to continue until and unless what you call in the business sense a steady state.
So I think very clearly technology is overtaking some of these jobs, some of these roles, some of these skill sets. And why are some of the companies shutting down 100 people at a go or one full department or a full function? It is because they figured out that technology has replaced all of those human skill sets. Uh, and that's the reality. So it's not only startups, but we are seeing it in the larger technology space, consumer tech space as well. जहाँ पे भी technology used है, I think we are also seeing humans at risk from loss of those jobs. Without bringing, let's say, the political angle to this, how do we then safeguard human jobs? Is how do we then upskill humans very, very quickly? But the reality is, while we might upskill humans on one side very, very quickly, the other side is technology is becoming cheaper by the day, and the cost of technology and its impact is increasing.
Unlike the UK and the US or the West, right? The kind of employees that we are talking about in India are not protected in the manner that they are protected in the West, right? So, in India, there are two categories of employees, workmen and non workmen. And the category in question falls within the non workmen category, which means that they are not protected in the manner a workman would be protected, right? Now, the practice that has been followed right now, and that is also to protect the IP, the data, the sensitive information that an employee has been sitting on, right? No one sort of wants to give a 30-day notice. And what the law permits is to give 30-day notice or payment in lieu of notice. So what an employer would typically do is send a notice, like you said, late at night. Not give a 30-day notice, but payment in lieu of notice. And like you said, these are heavily funded startup, right? So if they have to do away with certain employees, they are sitting on that amount of cash to pay them. Unfortunately, the employees are left high and dry after that, right?
And why not? The core reason is funding. The issue with startups which rely more on VC funding than revenue for sustenance Raising the next round of funding is the most important job, even more than the core job of the company. In 2020 and 2021, sample this, when the interest rates across the world were down, VC money, which was largely borrowed, flooded the ecosystem, the Indian startup ecosystem. In fact, in 2021, Indian startups raised a record 35 to 42 billion in more than 1500 deals. In 2022, this number fell down to 25.2 billion. 2021 was also the year of IPOs. 63 IPOs raised a record 1,18,723 crore rupees. Money was cheap at that time. Massive hirings were made, projections touching the moon and back. In some cases, the projections even surpassed many galaxies. And then there was blow. From mid 2022, the Federal Reserve and the central banks across the world started to increase interest rates. And funding winter had arrived for startups and tech companies relying extensively and only on rounds and rounds of fundings. Small revenue but big funding. Post COVID, people started returning to work, and the edtech sector was the first casualty. No one can blame one person or one founder or one VC for all these firings. It's an ecosystem, ladies and gentlemen. An ecosystem where VCs focus only on valuations and creating unicorns instead of profitable and sustainable companies.
They felt that there's a new consumption class growing in India, and selling to these people, these IT sector employees, the financial sector employees, corporate sector employees, will lead their companies, which they are backing, these startups, will lead to exponential growth from a consumption point of view. So they went ahead, they hired, a second level person, a third level person, started paying them much above market rates, knowing that, oh, our company is gonna, grow to this X level. Those projections itself were flawed because of a lack of understanding of India's macro economy.
Let's say somebody is getting a 5 lakh package, a startup offers you 12 lakhs. Now, that's the kind of disruption they do and attract good talent. Now, when you're doing that, you have an ecosystem which has an influx of huge number of talented people, and then you're solving a problem where there is a demand, but suddenly you have a stumbling block. Now you are not able to expand the EBITDA or expand the margins. Now, when you see that, by that time you've already acquired, let's say, 10,000 employees. Now you know that when you do the maths again on the spreadsheets, on the profits, the bottom lines and top lines, you find that okay, salary is the largest chunk that's going, so hit that first. Where do you hit? 2,000 employees. That's the way it happens. It is not intentional they want to do it, but remember, it's also a learning process.
The finger will point at all the stakeholders. For example, including us as employees. We quit jobs where we are earning 100 rupees because somebody is offering 125. 25% increase. Mid-year, we quit jobs and join somewhere else. That's also we have seen. Uh, India is probably one of the few markets globally which has seen consistent, very high single-digit or double-digit bonuses and appraisal numbers the last so many years. So one, the employees, I wouldn't call it greed, but somewhere FOMO as well. Two, if I talk about boards, it is a race, almost a race to the bottom. It is not race to the top. मैंने भी इतना पैसा उठाया, I raised so many crores, I am in Series B funding, C funding, and unfortunately, the media also covers only those stories, right? I mean, you're not saying why are you even worth $20 billion as an edtech? Nobody ever said how many jobs were created out of those unicorns, right?
It's true that the founders do get impacted, but the worst impacted are the employees, in some cases, sole breadwinners. It's not that firings can't be made, but the general consensus is instead of firing later, can't companies do rational hiring or slow hiring or filtered hiring? What's the urgency of projecting big growth numbers and hiring massive number of people? The second part of this story, ladies and gentlemen, has got to do with mental health morale of these employees. To be honest, it disrupts the morale, confidence and self-esteem of these employees. A number of employees who were fired did not want to come on record for the story and speak as they were under contract for the next 60 days. In case they speak to the media, the full and final settlement or the leaving letter will not be issued. You heard that right.
Whenever companies lay someone off, they give them a cooling period. Matlab, there is so the cooling period is based on ki they hold your FNF, they hold your severance check, and that is released only after 75 days. So usually when people mass layoffs are happening, you'll never see it on LinkedIn, you'll never see it online, because people are waiting, and also you are waiting for your recommendation letter, you're waiting for your exit letter. All of that is kept on hold for 75 days. When the 75 days are over, you've moved on, you've got another job, you've accepted it, all your 5 stages of grief are over. So it's just another part of life. So my HR would ask me, "Ki, did you get fired?" in my new interview, and I just didn't have what it took to say that yeah, I was laid off, because automatically your next HR would be like, "Oh, is she bad at her job?" Or like, I cannot tell her कि no restructuring is happening, they've done this there. ये तो तुम्हारे बैक ऑफ माई माइंड रहता ही है यार कि शायद मैं मेरे में कुछ होगा.
It's like the ground beneath your feet moving. So obviously, the person takes a huge hit. There is a self confidence hit. There is a professional confidence hit. Because let's face it, we are talking about your re-employability is going to be a question. Oh, why did you quit, and what is this gap? How do you go back? Because you have to go back and explain. And then there is a lot of judgment that gets associated with being jobless, regardless of why you're jobless. And then as a candidate, when I go to the next interview, if I talk about that I was thrown out of my job, then I'm a bad candidate. I can't bring that up.
And therefore, a change is happening in form of silent rebels. There is a growing discontent amongst employees and huge trust deficit amongst smart talent for startups, especially in the Indian ecosystem. It's expected that 2025 will come up with more jobs from the startup ecosystems, but employees are cautious. They now want to do thorough background checks, delve into companies' numbers. Is the startup only funding driven, or is there actually revenue, profit in the light? Employees who are disgruntled with firings, replaced by AI or automation, and unpredictability over the future have started moonlighting extensively, and you can't blame them. Some of them spoke to us but refused to come on record even with a mask. Their argument: if companies and startups and investors are thinking about themselves, why shouldn't we? But what do labor laws of India say about this? More so, what precautions can employees take before signing a contract?
The way the law stands right now, there is no provision for moonlighting. By that, I mean that there is nothing which restricts them from moonlighting, or there is an enabling provision which allows them moonlighting. Now, historically, and the way these contracts have been shaped up, right, it's been a single employment contract. And even the contract would have provision to say that, you can only have a single employer. What my recommendation and advice to the employees would be, heavily negotiate your contracts, right? There are certain safeguards that they can really really negotiate in the agreements. First is to start with agree on a longer notice period. It worked both ways, right? And given that it's been lopsided towards the employer, my experience has been it still works for employees benefit if they have agreed to say a 3 month or 6 month notice period, which means that even if the employer is firing them overnight, they still get paid for 6 months, which gives them enough runway to look for another job, right? Second is negotiate on moonlighting. The fundamental principle remains is that you can't use your current company data or work for someone else during the working hours of the current company, right? Talk about a founder of a unicorn, right? While their full-time role is to work for that unicorn, all their employment contract have carve out, where they can work in advisory capacity for other companies and they get paid as well, right? So it's like pot calling the kettle black. They are in it themselves moonlighting. Yeah, so the employees, I would say, they can certainly negotiate and negotiate hard on this clause.
Will there be more changes, customizations, flexibilities, vendor arrangements in revised contract terms? Or will this trend continue for some time before the bubble bursts? We at Mint shall keep you posted, because this is an interesting story and it tells us a lot about India's job economy, India's future. I, along with my team, shall see you in the next episode of Mint Deep Dive. Bye-bye.